I'm Elliot Peters, and this is What Was That About? A show that tries to get to the point of every movie. This week we're talking about a culinary animated masterpiece from Disney and Pixar. It's Ratatouille. You can expect a quick plot refresher, a couple deep dives, a tangent or two, and at the end we'll decide once and for all, what was that about? All that and more after this quick intro. Welcome everybody. I'm excited to talk about an animated movie, specifically a Pixar movie. I grew up on Pixar. I loved Toy Story, I loved Cars, I loved Monsters, Inc. I think I remember watching Cars on DVD at my grandma's house when I was maybe 6 years old, and it blew my mind. Just blew my mind. Of course, now, looking back, Cars isn't necessarily one of my favorite Pixar movies. I think there's some logical inconsistencies, and it ripped a lot of its story beats from a movie called Doc Hollywood, starring Michael J. Fox. Really odd concoction of a movie, but we're not talking about Cars. Today we're talking about Ratatouille. This movie came out in 2007. It was directed by Brad Bird and written by Brad Bird. Cinematography by Sharon Callahan and Robert Anderson. Cinematography in animation is one of those things that people don't really think about because, of course, it's all constructed in a computer, or if it's drawn by hand, the shot composition is done by a lot of different people, a lot of different artists. But with 3D animation, cinematography is a huge job. The cast from this movie is wonderfully eclectic. You've got Patton Oswalt, Lou Romano, Ian Holm, Brad Garrett, Peter O'Toole, and Janine Garofalo. It was edited by Darren T. Holmes, with music by my favorite composer, Michael Giacchino. I know that that's a big claim to make. Everyone has their own favorite film composer. Mine is Michael Giacchino. I grew up watching Lost, ABC's Lost, and I loved his work on that series, and he has only continued to put out stellar, incredible work as the years have gone on. Everything from The Incredibles to Rogue One, a Star Wars story. A really, really ingenious artist. So, why did I choose this movie? Animation certainly deserves its flowers. There are a lot of people out there who would ride or die for animation as an art form and as a medium. It has incredible potential to carry narratives that can't be carried in any other form. Ratatouille is one such beautiful story that couldn't be told in any other medium. I mean, just imagine, close your eyes for a second and imagine with me what a live-action Ratatouille would look like. It's hideous, isn't it? It's a terrible movie. Another reason is that the geniuses at Pixar are masters of story structure. I always tell people, if you want to study structure, study Pixar. I think that this comes down to the iterative nature of putting together an animated movie. There's so many passes on each film, from storyboard to finished product, and they really nail down the story before any other work needs to happen. Imagine, you've got this enormous army of artists who are going to take the whole thing apart shot by shot, and then you have to reconstruct it together in editing later. Obviously, you want to have all of your ducks in a row before you send it out to that army. And so for that reason, Pixar movies have some of the most incredibly dialed-in structure of any films that you'll find in popular cinema. But why Ratatouille specifically? Ratatouille, next to other Pixar classics like, say, Monsters, Inc. or Toy Story, kind of flies under the radar. Everyone agrees that it is among the studio's best, but it often gets passed over in favor of talking about something more objectively aspirational, like the genuine sci-fi of Wall-E, or something more unapologetically nostalgic, like Cars. Talking about Ratatouille in a serious thematic sense is something that I don't see a lot of people doing, and yet it has a lot of potential for that kind of conversation, and I think you'll find that it's going to hold water. But then, of course, we can't be objective about things we love, and I really do love this movie. The style is absolutely beautiful. This is really before Pixar's push towards more photorealistic styles in later movies, and Ratatouille bridges the divide between the uncanny and the realistic through gorgeous, gorgeous aesthetic choices, building a fantasy version of Paris that captures the imagination. Pixar's artists have talked at length about the fact that when Toy Story was first being created, ideally, what the Pixar animation crew really wanted to go for was photorealism all along. And as the films have come out, they've taken strides to try to perfect how to render a photoreal world in a digital space. You can see them iterating different elements of the technology and developing different ways of rendering these really detailed and photoreal environments and skin and hair and water and clouds. But Ratatouille sits in what I believe is that sweet spot. Another reason I love this movie is because I firmly believe that this is one of the most original ideas ever put to screen. And it's something so deeply silly that it really shouldn't work. Obviously, the hair-pulling puppetry bit is incredibly contrived. It definitely feels like the kind of story decision that was made simply to make other things happen in the story. Yet the movie stakes all of the drama on this one mechanic working to the point that it forces you to engage with the absurd in order to enjoy the story. And I love the absurd. So I love that watching this movie, I am asked to believe something incredibly silly. Obviously, it's played a little for laughs. But you have to believe that this one thing works in order for any of the movie to make any sense. And then, of course, Brad Bird is a brilliant filmmaker across the board. The Iron Giant is a Brad Bird project, The Incredibles, and my favorite of the Mission Impossible films, Ghost Protocol. His new animated film, Ray Gun, comes out later this year through Skydance Animation. I think it's being released through Netflix. It's been described as a retro-futurist mashup of the Maltese Falcon and Buck Rogers. Absolutely gonzo stuff, sounds insane. But I am 100% on board for whatever journey Brad Bird wants to take me on. Because when it comes to reversals and plotting and character, there's no one else like him in the animation business. But what was Ratatouille about? On paper, Remy, voiced by Patton Oswalt, is a common rat who, through a series of mishaps, ends up in the kitchen of Gusteau's restaurant in Paris, France. When he meets a young busboy named Linguini, Remy's dreams of becoming a gourmet chef are finally within reach. The pair team up, drawing suspicion from the restaurant's head chef, Skinner, who attempts to foil their meteoric rise at every turn. Linguini soon discovers he's the heir to Gusteau's culinary empire, leading to a confrontation with the cynical food critic, Anton Ego. On the one hand, a really compelling little restaurant drama, and then you inject a little bit of fantasy into there. There's a talking rat, and the rest of the story spins out of that ingenious decision. Beneath the surface, Ratatouille is a complex story with familiar elements in an unfamiliar skin. It takes tried and true narrative beats and plays them out with a cast of vibrant and original characters with very complex dynamics that allows the screenplay and the story at large to bandy about these weighty thematic ideas. I'm going to take you through 4 different potential overarching themes for Ratatouille, and at the end we're going to discuss all 4 of them and try to decide which one of them maps the best onto the film as a whole. So theme 1 is survival. At the very, very beginning of the movie, the opening image, Remy is first introduced to us in a state of survival, attempting to escape the restaurant while being chased by the staff. It's an in media res, I bet you're wondering how I got here kind of bit that the movie starts off with. Kind of a corny joke that has been overplayed in years since, but it's important that it starts there because you need to understand this one specific aspect of Remy's life and about really all of the characters' lives when you think about it. We're going to look at a scene to really demonstrate how survival functions in the world of Ratatouille. Jumping in deep later on in the film, as a lot of things are kind of falling apart, Remy's trying to reconcile his heritage, his rat family, with the world that he's come to inhabit and the life that he wants for himself. And he has come back home and is interacting with a lot of the people that he starts the story with, including his father, Django, who takes him into the city to look at a specific storefront, because there's a lesson there that he wants Remy to take away. So Django scrambles out of the curbside drain and turns to face the storefront behind them. Remy sits next to him and looks up, following his father's gaze. His jaw drops in horror. Displayed in the window of the small shop are a variety of nasty-looking metal traps, rat traps to be precise, and alongside of those hang row after row of dead rats. A very grim image for a children's film, really, to show corpses, dead bodies. But the reality of this situation needs to be understood by both the audience and by Remy in this moment. Django says, "Take a good long look, Remy. This is what happens when a rat gets a little too comfortable around humans." Remy looks away. Django's tone is tender but firm. Django says, "The world we live in belongs to the enemy. We must live carefully. We look out for our own kind, Remy. When all is said and done, we're all we've got. His point made, Django turns to go. Remy stares up at the horrible window, then softly says, "No." Django stops in his tracks. "What?" Remy says, "No, Dad, I don't believe it. You're telling me that the future can only be more of this?" Django says, "This is the way things are. You can't change nature." Remy says, "Change is nature, Dad. The part that we can influence. And it starts when we decide." So in a lot of ways, Ratatouille is an underdog story, right? And when you have an underdog narrative, it's about someone overcoming something. And a lot of the time that is the status quo, the guiding set of principles that are held by the established order. And the underdog kind of has to usurp that established order by undermining those principles in a way that flips everything on its head. And here we see that the established order of the world of Ratatouille is one of abject horror. It's one of survival in the face of massive, massive adversity. Django says that the world that they live in belongs to the enemy, and in a sense, he's right, you know? It's not necessarily that he's incorrect, it is that the world needs to change, and the way that the world works needs to change in order for Remy's guiding ideology to be the one that comes out on top. Now let's take a look at another scene to understand that Remy is not the only person who is simply trying to survive. And it's not necessarily as cut and dry as Django makes it out to be, humans versus rats. It goes deeper than that. So in the earlier half of the film, Linguini and Remy find a way to work together, their very unconventional method of rat puppeting chef around a kitchen. They have to accomplish this one very early task, which is to recreate a dish that Remy and Linguini kind of accidentally made together the night before. And they accomplish this through a lot of practice. There's this little montage in Linguini's apartment where, using hanks of Linguini's hair to control Linguini's actions, Remy pilots Linguini, who is blindfolded to keep him from cheating, through an increasingly complex set of cooking tasks. Everything from cutting vegetables to flipping crepes. During this comic montage, we see Remy learning precisely how to pilot Linguini, and at the same time, Linguini is learning how to surrender himself to being piloted. By dawn, Linguini and Remy have meshed into one finely honed cooking machine. We cut to the kitchen the very next morning. Linguini stands off to the side, fretting as Skinner pulls a ladle of soup from Linguini's pot and tastes it. Chef Skinner says, "Congratulations, you were able to repeat your accidental success. But you will need to know more than soup if you are to survive in my kitchen, boy. Colette will be responsible for teaching you how we do things here." We'll get into the relationship between Linguini and Colette in a minute, but I want to point out that Skinner says, "if you are to survive in my kitchen." Obviously, Linguini is another underdog, and the established set of order does not simply apply to rats as the downtrodden. There are a lot of downtrodden. Linguini is also downtrodden, and Skinner embodies the established set of rules by which society operates. So they are one and the same. And throughout the movie, there are a lot of different examples of the way that survival forces people to act in sometimes selfish ways, in sometimes mutually beneficial ways. At the very beginning of the film, Remy and Emile escape from that old woman in her house. Remy and his family immediately after that must avoid drowning, a very literal sense of survival. Linguini then takes Remy under his wing to further his own survival. Emile's friends, who keep showing up outside of the restaurant demanding food, they grow a little greedy, but their initial need for food is born out of necessity. Remy has to be told not to steal food by Linguini. All of this, I think, is a really apt sort of theme for a movie about food, because food by nature is sustenance, first and foremost. This is maybe zooming out a little too far, we're getting very heady, but we are evolutionarily predisposed to enjoy food because we need to eat it. It's a chemical byproduct that we find existential joy in. Let's move on. Theme 2, I would frame as being the relationship that the characters have to the ideas of legacy and tradition. Obviously very, very big deals in the world of cooking. Throughout the movie, Remy, as the main character, both embraces and kind of bucks tradition. He respects legacy. He aspires to want to become a chef because of his admiration for Gusteau and all that Gusteau stands for. But he has an ego about him. It's almost his fatal flaw as a character that causes him to disrespect authority. One of the genius things about the movie is the way that it frames that flaw as being a good thing in the earlier part of the movie. right? Where he has to reject his father's way of teaching him how to live. But that same exact mechanic, that same aspect of Remy's personality becomes a major problem in the latter half of the movie as he starts to directly disrespect the authority of people that he probably should be following the instructions of. The tensions between legacy and individuality is a central conflict in the film, and it appeals to multiple characters' egos. It's not just Remy. Linguini as well succumbs to the comfort of legacy after he embraces his position as the heir to the restaurant. Let's take a look at another scene. Okay, so this is the scene in which Skinner attempts to stump Linguini. I'll read the scene first and then we'll get into exactly what I'm trying to get at here. So Linguini has risen through the ranks of the kitchen and he is now a chef in the restaurant. And Gusteau's is open for business and Skinner says, "Now is your chance to try something worthy of your talent, Linguini. A forgotten favorite of the chef's. Sweetbread à la Gusteau. Colette will help you." Colette says, "Oui, chef." Skinner says, "Now hurry up. Our diners are hungry." Skinner turns to go to his office. A worried LaRousse, another member of the kitchen staff, rushes up to him, speaking in a low, concerned voice. "Are you sure? That recipe was a disaster. Gusteau himself said so." Skinner says, "Just the sort of challenge a budding chef needs." Skinner disappears inside his office, humming to himself. Linguini looks over Colette's shoulder as she stares at an old, yellowing recipe card, sizing up its ingredients. Colette says, "Sweetbread à la Gusteau. Sweetbread cooked in a seaweed salt crust with cuttlefish tentacle, dog rose puree, geoduck egg, dried white fungus, anchovy licorice sauce." Huh. Colette shrugs it off and turns to Linguini. "I don't know this recipe, but it is Gusteau. So, Lalo, we have some veal stomach soaking, yes?" Lalo says, "Yes, the veal stomach, I get that." Linguini says, "Veal stomach?" Remy pilots Linguini's hand to lift the small pot of snail porridge off the burner and up to Linguini's toque for an obligatory sniff. Remy looks at the porridge, then at the rack of fresh spices. Suddenly, Remy pilots Linguini to go for the spices, lifting them rapidly one by one up to the toque to sniff. Remy selects one that smells right and dumps it in the pot. Linguini suddenly leans forward, tilting his toque over the fragrant steam from the simmering pot. Remy takes a whiff, likes what he smells. Inspired, he pilots Linguini out into the kitchen. Linguini is alarmed by his sudden ramble, completely unsure of what he's doing, what he's looking for. This whole section is played for laughs, but it is a very intense moment. There's a very real conflict that has to be resolved, and Remy's trying to solve a problem. We know that the deck is stacked against him, and he has to fix this dish before it's too late. Linguini is piloted through other people's stations. He says, "Pardon me, just need to borrow this really quick. Sorry, apparently I need this. I'll be right back." To the others, Linguini looks absolutely deranged. He's a man who's clearly lost control of both his body and his faculties. Linguini careens back to his station and dumps the ingredients into his pan, startling Colette, who says, "What are you doing? We are supposed to be preparing the Gusteau recipe." Linguini says, this is the recipe." Colette says, "The recipe doesn't call for white truffle oil. What else have you... You are improvising. This is no time to experiment. The customer is waiting." Linguini says, "You're right," and he nudges the toque and says, "I should listen to you." Linguini suddenly slaps his own face and then leans his toque over the sweetbread. Colette says, "Stop that." Linguini says, "Stop what?" Colette says, "Freaking me out. Whatever you're doing, stop it." And then the waiter comes in and says, "Where's the special order?" Both Colette and Linguini are working quickly now, but on separate dishes, giving the appearance of a competition. Colette says, "Coming," then low to Linguini, "I thought we were together on this." Linguini says, "We are together." Colette says, "Then what are you doing?" Linguini says, "It's very hard to explain." "The special! Come get it!" Remy watches angrily as Colette sets the plate at the pass to be picked up, a hank of hair in each paw waiting for an opening. Colette glances at the recipe. "Oh, I forgot to add the licorice." She rushes back to get it. Remy sees his chance. Linguini finds himself grabbing his pan and hurtling towards Colette. Colette is about to add the licorice sauce when Linguini swoops in and blocks her hand. Colette is stunned. Her eyes flash at Linguini, who looks petrified. His left hand holds his pan of sauté, which trembles over the sweetbread. Colette says, "Don't you dare." Linguini says, I'm not. And then he dumps the sauté over Colette's dish the moment before it's swept away by Mustafa, the waiter. Linguini says, "Sorry." So it's a really fun, really funny, very energetic scene. And I chose this scene because it does a very wonderful job of complicating the relationship that the characters have to legacy and tradition. Obviously, Remy is right to change the dish because it was intended to be an impassable test from Chef Skinner. He is being set up to fail, essentially. But at the same time, Remy is behaving brashly because he fractures Linguini's relationship with Colette. who wants to respect the tradition because, as she says, it's Gusteau, so it should be good, right? This is exactly the type of conflict that the characters have with this idea of legacy and tradition that ends up fracturing further relationships and pushing characters into different directions as the movie goes on. Here's another really interesting example where tradition and the subversion of tradition is interrogated by the movie. While Colette is showing Linguini around the kitchen, she says, "I know the Gusteau style cold. In every dish, Chef Gusteau always has something unexpected. I will show you. I memorize all his recipes." Linguini is writing down what she's saying, and he says, "Always do something unexpected." Colette says, "No, follow the recipe." Linguini goes, "But you just said," and Colette says, "It was his job to be unexpected. It is our job to," and then they both say together, "follow the recipe." So the film begs the question, when does one graduate from merely following the recipe to doing the unexpected? Must you learn the fundamentals before innovating? Remy doesn't seem to. In fact, the movie seems to prop him up as being this generational born talent that has to be celebrated and should be recognized, but also should be humbled at the same time. It's a delicate balance. And I love that the movie doesn't necessarily give a very clean answer on any of the themes that it discusses, but it offers a very frank conversation about a lot of difficult themes. In the end, the movie really marries these two ideas together by serving the titular dish, ratatouille, which is a traditional dish, very untraditionally prepared in a gourmet restaurant. It's the perfect putting together of legacy, innovation, tradition, and subversion. Really great stuff. Let's move on to theme 3. This, I think, is the way that the characters define passion in their art, or the relationship that the characters have with their art in general. So we're going to return to that scene where Colette is showing Linguini the ropes. During that sequence, she brings him to the bakery, and Colette pulls a loaf from a basket of freshly baked bread and shows it to Linguini. She says, "How do you tell how good bread is without tasting it? Not the smell, not the look, but the sound of the crust. Listen." She holds the loaf to her ear. Linguini leans in to listen. Remy also leans in. Colette gives the bread a squeeze. The crackle is seductive. She and Linguini smile at the pleasing crunch. The sound design in this movie is so good. Colette says, "A symphony of crackle. Only great bread sounds this way." Colette and Linguini have begun their prep. There is a new relaxation between them. Colette says, "The only way to get the best produce is to have first pick of the day, and there are only 2 ways to get first pick. Grow it yourself, or bribe the grower." She gestures to the back door. Outside, a produce seller, conversing amicably with LaRousse, sets down a crate of gorgeous fruit and vegetables. LaRousse slips him money. Again, the stylization of the world, really gorgeous, beautiful food, some beautiful vegetables, everything looks delicious, and it's a type of culinary perfection that you really can only get through animation. Colette says, "Voila, the best restaurants get first pick." Linguini and Colette cook side by side, their manner now as easy and familiar as old friends. Colette goes, "People think haute cuisine is snooty, so chefs must also be snooty. But not so. Lalo there ran away from home at 12, got hired by circus people as an acrobat, got fired for messing around with the ringmaster's daughter. Horst has done time." Linguini says, "What for?" She says, "No one knows for sure. He changes the story every time you ask him." You get a little talking head, which is a very interesting little cutaway gag that the movie does. And it never tries this again with anybody else. But Horst says, "I defrauded a major corporation. I robbed the second largest bank in France using only a ballpoint pen. I created a hole in the ozone layer over Avignon. I killed a man with this thumb." Colette goes on and continues to describe the other members of the staff. "Don't ever play cards with Pompidou. He's been banned from both Las Vegas and Monte Carlo. LaRousse ran guns for the resistance." Linguini says, "Which resistance?" And Colette says, "He won't say. Apparently they didn't win." And then Colette finishes off her little spiel about everybody and says, "So, you see, we are artists. Pirates. More than cooks are we." Linguini goes, "We?" Colette says, "We. You are one of us now, we?" Linguini says, "We." Again, a very funny scene. The movie has a wonderful sense of humor, but it's also very touching, and it engages with the darkness and the history of France. It ingrains all of the different cast of characters into the fabric of their world, and it doesn't shy away from some things that I think other animated films or other films geared toward children might shy away from or want to look away from, such as resistance or guns or rebellion or crime, criminality. These types of things lend a sense of realism to the characters that you don't find in a lot of other films like this. And more so than that, Colette calls everybody artists. She says, "We're artists, pirates, more than cooks are we." There's something transcendental about the relationship that all of them have with their work. They come from disparate places, disparate backgrounds, but they all share this passion, this art, which is cooking, that puts them all in the same place and forces them all to create magic together. And so it's pivotal that this information comes from Colette, who is shown to be an avid rule follower, yet she still maintains this passion for the art of cooking and describes herself as an artist among everybody else. We. Remy is, of course, the most passionate character in the film, risking life and limb in the name of his craft again and again. And also the antagonist, Anton Ego, as well, displays passion for his own art. He says, "I don't like food, I love it." You can really feel these characters' love for what they do. You might remember that I said I was going to talk about 4 different themes. Well, we've arrived at the 4th one, and it is the idea of the origin of greatness, or as the movie puts it, the idea that anyone can cook. And what I'm going to read for you next is, I think, my favorite passage of writing in the whole movie. It is a beautiful monologue, gorgeously performed by the legendary Peter O'Toole as Anton Ego. And this speech comes at the very tail end of the movie. It is the turning point around which all of the drama hinges. This is Anton Ego's review. Ego says, "In many ways, the work of a critic is easy. We risk very little, yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and themselves to our judgment. We thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read. But the bitter truth we critics must face is that, in the grand scheme of things, the average piece of junk is probably more meaningful than our criticism designating it so. But there are times when a critic truly risks something, and that is in the discovery and defense of the new. The world is often unkind to new talent, new creations. The new needs friends. Last night I experienced something new, an extraordinary meal from a singularly unexpected source. To say that both the meal and its maker have challenged my preconceptions about fine cooking is a gross understatement. They have rocked me to my core. In the past, I have made no secret of my disdain for Chef Gusteau's famous motto, "Anyone can cook." But I realize only now do I truly understand what he meant. Not everyone can become a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere. It is difficult to imagine more humble origins than those of the genius now cooking at Gusteau's, who is, in this critic's opinion, nothing less than the finest chef in France. I will be returning to Gusteau's soon, hungry for more. Really incredible bit of writing that deals with something that could so easily have turned sentimental or mushy or cloying, but it's so authentically written from a cynic's point of view that you're carried away by it. And it's just a gorgeous, glorious ending to this beautiful little movie. The film repeatedly visits that phrase, "anyone can cook," interrogating the idea behind it through argument for it, counter-argument against it, and ultimately, as you've seen through Anton Ego's words, a reinterpretation of it. The brilliance of Ratatouille is in taking something objectionable, a rat in a kitchen, and flipping the script entirely on its head. Brilliance can come from the unlikeliest of places. It's almost more important to keep saying anyone can cook than believing it, because merely by saying it, we coax the geniuses of the world out of their hiding places and upend our prejudices even as we maintain them. So, We've gone through the themes. What was it about? Let's revisit them one by one. Survival. Something very, very important to most of the characters in the movie. Even the antagonists, even Skinner, has to face survival when he loses his job. Legacy and tradition. The movie deals very heavily with these two things. All of the different characters seem to have some kind of take on the idea of legacy or the idea of tradition, whether or not they need to be upheld, whether or not they need to be subverted. Then you've got passion and art. The movie is really inspiring. It's a beautiful thing to watch, and at the end of the movie, you cannot help, if you are an artist, you cannot help but want to go out and create more art. It's the kind of movie that helps you rediscover all the things that you love about the thing that you do. And then you've got this concept of greatness. Ratatouille ends with the phrase "anyone can cook" being dissected, being more deeply understood, being reinterpreted. If you asked me, what was that about? I would say the origin of greatness and the idea that anyone can cook. Thanks for being here. Feel free to rate the show wherever you're listening, and if you think you know somebody who might like the pod, share it around. It really helps. You can watch video versions of the podcast as well as find clips from the film I've talked about today on my social media and YouTube pages. Just visit your local search engine and look for my Substack, Under the Paperweight. From there, you can follow me wherever you like. Instagram, Letterboxd, you name it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you soon.